My name is Amanda, and I've always loved escaping the city to relax in nature. In January 2023, my boyfriend, Eric, and I decided to rent a cabin in Big Bear Lake, a small town surrounded by mountains and forests. The weather was cold, and the forecast predicted heavy snow, but we were both excited about the getaway. As soon as we arrived, the winter landscape was beautiful, covered by a soft layer of snow. Yet at the same time, there was an air of desolation that seemed to weigh upon us. The cabin we rented was old and rustic, with a charm that hid a dark past. It seemed like it had been abandoned for years, except for a yellowed reservation slip we found left on the kitchen table. As night fell and the snow began to fall more heavily, we realized we were completely isolated. No cell phone signal, no internet, and no neighbors in sight. What should have comforted us only heightened the feeling of isolation and vulnerability. As we settled in and lit the fireplace, we tried to ignore the unease that grew within us. It was then that Eric mentioned a strange incident he had read about regarding a group of people who disappeared during a winter retreat in the same area years ago. I laughed and suggested he was exaggerating, but a part of me couldn't shake off the shadow of doubt that crept in. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the cabin became oppressive and heavy. The wind howled outside, and the creaks of the old wood echoed in the silence, signaling that the storm was intensifying. Then, in the midst of the darkness, we began to hear strange noises outside, footsteps in the snow scraping against the cabin wood. At first, we thought they might just be wild animals, but as the sounds intensified, the tension and fear became palpable. Eric, always brave, insisted we should investigate. When he stepped out to look, I was left alone in the cabin, and that moment of solitude quickly transformed into a nightmare. The silence felt heavy, and Eric's phone continued to show no signal, amplifying the sensation of being completely isolated. When he finally returned, there was a look of concern on his face that I couldn't ignore. He hesitated to tell me what he had seen until, finally, in a tense whisper, he revealed that he had seen a hooded figure disappearing among the trees. Our hearts raced, and a wave of terror washed over us. The atmosphere, which had already felt uncomfortable, now felt unbearable. We decided to lock all the doors and windows, even knowing that nothing could truly protect us from the uncertainty surrounding us. The feeling of being watched never faded, intensifying our apprehension. The night dragged on, feeling like an eternity of fear and anxiety. Snow fell as if the outside world were being buried, and the darkness seemed to grow more impenetrable by the minute. We tried to distract ourselves by telling scary stories and reminiscing about good times we had shared, but each laugh was muffled by the sound of the wind howling outside, as if it were laughing at us. There, in the flickering light of the fireplace, the sensation of being in a horror story became more real with each passing second. The noises outside did not cease, and the hooded figure that Eric had seen became a ghost haunting our minds. Soon, fatigue began to set in, and we tried to sleep, although the unease kept us alert. Yet, even as we tried to close our eyes, we couldn't escape the tension that surrounded us. The nightmare seemed just to be beginning, and the fear of the unknown kept us on constant edge. At dawn, we woke up to a bright day, but the storm still raged, blanketing the forest around us in a heavy white shroud. When we stepped out of the cabin to examine what had happened during the night, we found something unexpected. There were footprints in the snow surrounding the cabin, but they appeared to be from a single person, leading away from the cabin and into the forest. The feeling that what we had experienced was real made the situation even more alarming. A chilling sensation crept up my spine as we examined those tracks, now darker than any horror movie we had ever watched. The footprints were deep, indicating that whoever had been there had weight and an intensity that made everything feel more tangible. With a knot in my throat, I turned to Eric and saw him pale as snow. I could only imagine what those footprints implied. Should we follow the footprints? Eric asked, looking at the marks in the snow. Fear and curiosity battled within me as I tried to weigh the risks of venturing into the forest. At the same time, a part of me needed to understand what was happening. I felt an internal pressure as strong as the storm outside. Reluctantly, I agreed with Eric. Our sense of security in being together outweighed the need to remain in the cabin. We began to follow the footprints, our hearts beating in unison as we made our way through the soft snow. The wind cut like a blade, but the adrenaline kept us moving. As we distanced ourselves from the cabin, the universe seemed to twist around us. The branches of the trees creaked, and the air held a strange scent, as if it were charged with an ancient story. Looking back, the cabin started to fade into the white mist, swallowed by the mystery we had chosen to confront. The footprints led us away, deeper into the forest. As we ventured farther, I realized that the silence had thickened. There were no sounds of wildlife, not even the whisper of the wind, only an unsettling echo of our steps in the snow. I felt a chill on my back, as if I were being watched again. Eric noticed and held my hand. "Are we going in the right direction?" he asked, and my certainty began to waver. The fear of becoming another missing person's statistic started to grow. After what felt like an eternity, we spotted a small hidden clearing where an old cabin, very similar to the one we had rented, stood among the trees. The structure appeared almost unreal, as if it had been there for decades, waiting for someone. The walls were covered in moss, and the door was ajar, like an invitation to the unknown. A thick silence settled, and the footprints in the snow ended at the entrance, as if the person who had left them had simply evaporated. Curiosity and fear intertwined, and against my better judgment, we decided to investigate. We entered the cabin, and the smell of mold and decay hit us. The interior was dark, illuminated only by a few shafts of light shining through the aged boards. As Eric lit the lantern, we noticed several objects inside: broken furniture, dust-covered photographs of unknown people, and a fireplace that seemed to have been forgotten for years. A disturbing sensation washed over me, as if the faces in the photographs were watching me. As we inspected the area, the atmosphere grew oppressive. While rummaging through one of the drawers, I found an old diary. Its yellowed pages were stained and worn, but some words were legible. I could read accounts of people who had gone through terrifying experiences in the forest, stories of disappearances, whispers at night, and a hooded figure watching from the shadows. My stomach churned as I realized those stories were not very different from our own. So, in a moment of reflection, we decided that the solution wasn't to go back, but to tell our story. We launched a blog where we began documenting our experience, sharing not only what we lived through, but also the stories of others who had visited the same area. The response was surprising. Many connected with our experiences, and the community that formed around a shared passion for nature and the unknown illuminated something within us. The story didn't call out just to us, but to those who also heard the forest call. We became more aware that there is a dark side to nature that many choose to ignore, and the mystery of those voices still lingered. Through this new project, we discovered that fear can be a powerful driver for creativity and investigation, and we promised to keep that in mind while we continued to have our own experiences. And so, as winter gave way to spring and the snow melted, the forest of Big Bear Lake became a constant reminder that, while nature is beautiful and alluring, it can also harbor the darkest secrets that humanity is unprepared to face. Whatever we confronted there bound us together in ways we could never have predicted, and while no one could truly understand, we knew we would always carry that invisible bond, woven from experiences, fears, and mysteries. My name is Lucas, and in February 2021, I decided to spend a winter weekend in an isolated cabin in Mountain Home, Arkansas. I was looking for some time to relax and escape the stress of the city. The cabin was situated in a remote area, surrounded by tall trees and offering panoramic views. The biting cold and the overcast sky weren't what I had expected, but the initial tranquility was comforting and promised a welcome break from daily chaos. As night approached, I prepared to light the fireplace and get cozy. However, as the daylight began to fade, a feeling of strangeness overtook the place. The silence was absolute, except for the wind whistling through the trees. While I examined the cabin, I noticed some old items, a diary, photos, and other belongings that seemed to belong to a group of friends who had visited the same cabin years ago. An anxious curiosity began to consume me. When I opened the diary, I found entries about strange events that had occurred during their stay. Whispers coming from the forest, temporary disappearances, and even revelations about a supposed pursuer. I felt intrigued and at the same time a bit scared. As someone there just to relax, I didn't want to think about anything beyond my own peace. But the accounts weighed on me and began to set the rhythm of my breathing. As the night wore on and the snow began to fall heavily, the diary stories echoed in my mind. The silence of the cabin became oppressive, and a fierce storm was brewing outside, causing the walls to creak under the pressure of the wind. Soon, I heard soft knocks on the door, as if someone were trying to alert me or ask for help. My heart raced. The cold seemed to intensify, and a sense of dread washed over me. I tried to ignore what it might be. I convinced myself it could just be an animal. But with each knock, a more intense sensation arose in my stomach, making me question whether I was really alone there. With a surge of courage, I decided to get up and approach the door. However, before I could open it, the knocks stopped abruptly, followed by a deafening silence. I hesitated, listening to different noises outside. This time, however, they were voices, murmurs mingled with the wind that howled. I decided to turn on a lantern and look out the window. When I did, my body froze. Shadowy figures were moving between the trees, seemingly approaching the cabin. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as a voice in my mind screamed for me to run. But instead of acting, I remained there, paralyzed, merely observing the silhouettes drawing nearer. It was as if these shadows were beckoning me, wanting me to step outside to meet them. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed the diary and checked the last entries. One of the notes warned about intersecting dimensions, a phrase that seemed absurd, but fear made me question everything. Before I could process this, I heard a clear call, my name, coming from outside. It was as if someone was directly summoning me. At first, I thought it might be an illusion caused by my fear, but the voice was clear and insistent. I looked out the window again, and the figures were closer, almost as if they were watching my reactions. With my heart in my throat, I decided I couldn't bear that tension any longer. I slowly opened the door, the cold air enveloping me instantly. The storm raged around me, but within the blizzard, the figures had vanished. I looked around, and everything was unnaturally quiet. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through, and for a brief moment, the voice echoed again, but this time it sounded like a warning, go back home. Desperate, I shut the door and locked everything tight. I couldn't fall asleep that night. The feeling that something was out there, waiting for me, intensified. By dawn, the snowstorm had ceased, but the forest remained dark and foreboding. I decided it was time to leave the cabin. As I began to walk, I found footprints in the snow that appeared to head toward the forest but didn't come back. My heart racing, I followed the tracks, a mix of fear and curiosity pulling me forward. The footprints were wide, as if belonging to someone who didn't care about making noise. With each step I took, the sensation of being watched intensified. My instinct screamed for me to turn back and return to the cabin, but something within me desired to understand what had happened there. The morning fog gave the forest a ghostly appearance, and I couldn't help but think of the diary entries. Intersecting dimensions, I whispered to myself, trying to convince myself that it was just a hollow superstition. But there I was, following those footprints like a fool drawn to the light. The air was cold, and for a moment, I couldn't decide if I was trembling from the chill or from fear. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, a chill ran through my body as I noticed that the footprints ended abruptly in a small clearing. I looked around, expecting to find something else that indicated a presence. But all I saw were ancient trees, their thick trunks covered in moss and snow. The silence was deafening, and to my horror, I began to feel that something was amiss. The grove of the forest felt alive, as if it were aware of my presence. I decided to circle around the clearing, but with each step, panic intensified. In the center of the clearing, I noticed a small pile of objects covered in snow. As I approached, I identified several old photographs, most featuring faces that seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place why. My eyes fixated on one particular photo. It was a group of friends sitting in the same cabin where I was, all with broad, relaxed smiles, but there was something in their eyes that unsettled me. The wind began to pick up, and the whispers that were once just a distant echo transformed into voices that seemed to emerge from the very earth. It was as if those photographs were crying out for help. An uncontrollable impulse drove me to run back to the cabin. The thought that I might be experiencing the same fate as those friends terrified me. As I sprinted back, I was more determined than ever to leave that place. The cabin door was secure and untouched, but the marks of a dark past consumed my mind. The weight of the events that had occurred in that cabin felt oppressive. As soon as I entered, I locked the door tightly and let out a relieved sigh. The warmth from the fireplace offered slight comfort, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. In the final moments before I left, I decided to take one last look at the diary. Flipping through the pages hurriedly, I found a last entry that made me stop. It was a warning, a note that stated the dimensions are crossing, and that those who listened to the voice of the forest would never be the same. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that those friends weren't just missing. They could be trapped somewhere between realities, and now, just like them, I might be in danger. Without further ado, I grabbed my backpack, opened the door, and stepped into the diffused light of morning. With adrenaline pumping, following that path became my only priority. The forest seemed silent, as if it were awaiting my departure. I walked steadily, ignoring any urge to look back. The tales surfacing in my mind felt as real as the snowfall continuing to fall around me. Upon reaching the car, I breathed a sigh of relief, but when I glanced back one last time, the cabin appeared once again as just an old structure. But deep inside, I knew that nothing had been resolved. Something in that forest had marked me, and that weekend, which was meant to be relaxing, had turned into an experience filled with unsettling mysteries. With adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I promised myself that I would never return to Mountain Home. The forest, with its voices and shadows, would become a haunting memory that would follow me. And as I drove away, I wondered how many other stories like mine were being lived in the shadows of the forest. How many people had ventured toward the beauty of nature, only to encounter the hidden terror it could harbor. Life seemed ironic in its whims. I, who had gone there seeking peace, had faced a nightmare that defied all logic. The journey back to civilization was filled with turbulent thoughts. As I drove, I tried to remember the joyful moments of the trip, the anticipation of a peaceful weekend. But instead, images of the old cabin, the enigmatic faces in the photos, and the whispers echoed in my mind with a weight that seemed to pursue me. It felt ironic to think I would leave that place without a conclusive history, without explanations that made our experience more understandable. Amidst the panic and anxiety, one thought anchored itself in my mind. I needed to tell the story. Although the diary I found wasn't mine, it was my duty to share what I discovered so that others wouldn't face the same fate. When I finally arrived in the city, I began composing an account of everything that had happened, determined to alert anyone willing to listen. The forest, which had seemed so inviting, transformed into a symbol of warning. However, even as I wrote, a part of me hesitated. What would I say? How could I explain the inexplicable without sounding like a lunatic? The world had already lost its sense of what is real, and my account could just be another case of madness. At the same time, I knew stories similar to mine were not rare. Clearly, others could comprehend what was happening within their own experiences. I concluded that if I was willing to share, I had to be honest about what I felt. It wasn't just a horror story, but a reflection on human nature, the fragility of what we consider safe, and the strength of our instincts. I added every detail I could remember, every whisper and every shadow, hoping that others might find some value in the warning. As the days passed, the experience evolved within me. It became both terrifying and liberating, an opportunity for transformation. No matter how much I promised never to return, the forest lingered in my mind. It was as if it were calling to me, but I knew I couldn't succumb to that allure. Not now. After sharing the story on the online forum, I received a wave of responses. Others were willing to share their own stories and experiences. I discovered an entire community drawn to these accounts. People who had been affected by events beyond comprehension, which gave me a sense of belonging. If there was strength in our collective fears, perhaps there was also protection. Over time, I shifted my focus from merely recounting my experience to investigating more about those who had disappeared, those trapped between dimensions, as the diary had warned. Each story connected me with that group of friends who, like me, had been in search of something but ended up uncovering the dark side of nature. I needed to understand this entrapment and learn to respect the boundaries between what is visible and what remains hidden. The experience in Mountain Home shaped me in ways I could not have anticipated. Fear transformed into a powerful curiosity that could not be easily ignored. The forest became a constant reminder that the unknown is as fascinating as it is terrifying, and that we must always approach these mysteries with respect and caution. Thus, as I continue my journey, I've learned that facing the unknown is not a sign of weakness, but of courage. And as winter carried on in its dance, with its cold snows, I remained vigilant and committed to unraveling what was sinister within the beauty of the world beyond. After all, every shadow can tell a story. It all depends on who dares to listen to them. I'm Jenna, and in January 2022, I organized a trip with 3 friends to an isolated cabin in Green Mountain, Vermont. We had always been adventurers, but I was excited about a weekend of rest and fun away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The cold was biting, and the sky was overcast with gray clouds that signaled the approaching snowstorm, promising a fairy tale setting with its dark magic. We arrived at the cabin after a long journey and quickly settled in. The building had a rustic charm, with weathered wood and a crackling fireplace, but there was something unsettling in the air. During the first night, we decided to light the fireplace and share scary stories to warm our spirits. Laughter echoed, but soon I started to feel that the atmosphere was shifting. A profound silence enveloped the cabin, broken only by the crackle of wood in the fireplace and the lament of the wind in the trees. After a few hours, we began to hear noises coming from upstairs. "It must be the wind," someone commented, but the sound echoed convincingly, more intentional. Matt, always the boldest in the group, suggested we investigate. Although we hesitated, curiosity drove us up the stairs, where the lantern's light wavered as it illuminated our path. Each step we took seemed to cause a creak in the aged wooden stairs. When we reached a long hallway, we noticed that the doors were closed, concealing what might lie beyond. An unexpected chill enveloped us, and suddenly, the laughter we had heard echoed from one of the doors on our left. It was a strange sensation, as if someone were sharing intimate jokes, but for a moment, I thought it could just be a hallucination spurred by our imaginations. Or worse, something was actually there with us. With a mix of excitement and nervousness, we decided to open the door. When we pushed it, what we found was disturbing. The room was filled with strange objects, yellowing photographs that seemed to capture moments of joy from strangers, empty bottles, and other forgotten items. The air was thick with the smell of mold and an indescribable odor that evoked deep discomfort. I looked at the walls and noticed scrawled messages, names and dates, many of which appeared to belong to visitors who had come to that cabin years ago. Then a small jolt hit the group. Sarah, who was closest to the shadows, noticed something lurking. A figure was partially hidden behind a curtain. Our hearts raced in terror, and before we could react, the figure turned and revealed herself to be a woman. She had hollow eyes that seemed to pierce into our souls, and an expression of despair. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice low and raspy. "They are coming." Feeling the adrenaline surge, we made a hurried move toward the door. When the woman stepped closer, I saw she was trembling, as if trapped in a nightmare. We all bolted, rushing down the stairs and back into the main room, locking the door behind us. The sense of desperation had become overwhelming, a heavy cloak we couldn't ignore. Throughout that night, the sounds increased. Noises coming from upstairs, whispers and distant laughter filled the air, growing ever closer. We tried to ignore them, seeking comfort in each other's words. But when a loud thud came at the door, it was impossible not to panic. The fear was now rooted in every fiber of our being. The certainty that our safety was being challenged set in. As the morning light began to filter through the windows, I decided it was time to leave that cursed cabin. We headed for the car, still incredulous about what had happened. Looking back, I saw the woman once more in the cabin window, watching us depart. The expression on her face was fixed, reflecting a silent lament. The car was a short distance from the door, but when I looked again, the door was now open, as if inviting new visitors. At that moment, conflicting feelings assail my mind. The cabin felt like a twisted dream, as if the structure itself were alive, and the open door was a beckoning call to delve deeper into the dark mysteries that resided within. Yet now, with the fear of what had transpired still fresh in my mind, the urgency to escape outweighed my curiosity. I didn't want to know more about what had happened there, even as something deep inside me sensed that there was more to the story of that woman and the hints insinuated on the walls. Barely believing what we had just experienced, I quickly got into the car, and my friends followed suit, the silence only broken by the sound of tires crunching through the snow and the hesitant roar of the engine. With my gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, I saw the cabin fade into the distance as we drove away, yet the feeling of still being watched never left me. The image of the woman, with her hollow eyes and the despair etched on her face, remained vivid in my mind, a shadow seemingly leaping from the darkness. During the drive, we attempted to talk about the previous night, but the words felt inadequate to describe the intensity of what we had endured. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. The memories of laughter had transformed into echoes of fear, and we hesitated to share the details with anyone else, keeping the truth of our experience a closely guarded secret. As soon as we arrived in town, the sense of security that civilization offered me felt like a temporary relief. However, the experiences of that night became a weight on my heart. Society and normalcy seemed dull in comparison to what had challenged our understanding. What could have been just another adventure among friends had turned into a profound mystery, and I knew that, in some way, I would never be able to escape its grasp. In the days that followed, my mind was in constant turmoil. As I returned to my routine, I sought out the diary I had found in the cabin. It was impossible to forget those scrawls and how they related to our experience. From that moment on, I began to investigate the events that had occurred at the cabin and the story behind the woman we encountered. I discovered that we were not the only ones to experience strange things in the area. There were numerous accounts of people who had gone missing nearby, echoing a disturbing pattern that terrified those who dared to venture close. The need to share this story began to grow within me. The idea that others could benefit from our warning became compelling. Hesitantly, I wrote about the experience on a blog, focusing on describing not just the horror, but also the respect I felt for the experience. Fear could be a powerful driver for curiosity, but it should also serve as a warning. When I shared the account, reactions began to pour in. A community of people who had experienced something similar formed around me. We started discussing not only what we had lived through, but also what forests and nature could conceal beneath their tranquil surfaces. It was then that I realized that the experience would be key to forming a new support network, a place where we could vent and find solace amid our stories. With each new interaction, I felt stronger and more at ease. My relationship with nature and the unknown it harbors began to shift. While that night in Green Mountain would never be forgotten, it gradually transformed from a burden into a force that expanded my perspective. It wasn't just a transient fear. It was proof that life is filled with mysteries and truths that we often struggle to understand. Thus, I decided that what was once a past adventure filled with nightmares and horrors, could now be an occasion for learning and growth. Rather than fleeing the unknown, I could use it as a source of inspiration. As the snowstorm began to calm, the echoes of what we lived through would unite us in some way, converting our fear into a symbol of togetherness and respect for what life throws our way. The forest of Green Mountain now occupies a different space in my mind, and I vowed that when I looked to the future, I would see the fascinating amidst the shadows, knowing that even the most hidden secrets can shed light on new stories.